Well, hello everyone. The purpose of this video lesson is to get you through tonight's homework, which was to complete 2 data tables from the Bouncing Balls lab. All of you will complete the data table on slide number 14, and then you will fill out one of the data tables either on slide 15, 16, or 17, depending on what your dependent variable was for the Bouncing Balls lab. So I want to explain how to complete these 2 data tables. And if you remember for warm-up today, we had you read slides 4 and 5. So I'd like to talk about the information that was provided on slides 4 and 5. When scientists conduct an experiment, they can collect data. When they run their trials, they make observations and they record that data in data tables. There are 2 types of data that can be collected: qualitative data or quantitative data. So let's talk about how they are different. If you notice in the word quantitative data, quantity, or at least part of the word quantity, is kind of embedded in this term. So when you think of the word quantity, you know that it's a number value. And that's exactly what quantitative data is. It's collecting concrete data, usually in number format. It's considered real, specific, actual, or tangible data. So it's something that you can count or calculate. It's something that you can specifically measure with multiple tools. So the length or distance of something. In the crash lab, we measured the speed of the car as well as the length or distance that the block was pushed. If we're using a lab, if we're using liquids in a lab, we can measure volume of liquids. If we are conducting a lab on heat energy, we can measure the temperature of something. We can put a test sample on a scale and measure its mass. All of these number values are considered quantitative data. And quantitative data is what you need to make graphs, right? Because numbers are needed to construct a graph. Qualitative data, however, does not have to be a number value, but it needs to be good. It needs to be high quality data. In fact, the word, or at least part of the word, quality is embedded in the term qualitative. So the higher quality your qualitative data, the more reliable your data will be for the lab. So high quality data means that it's very detailed, it's very specific, it's very descriptive. Scientists usually use their 5 senses to observe and record their qualitative data. So they're writing down what they see, what they hear, feel, smell, or taste. Now remember, if they're going to taste something in a lab, you have to have teacher permission. Obviously it's dangerous to taste chemicals, so it would have to be something safe in order for you to be tasting it in a lab. You would never see really qualitative data on a pie chart or in a graph because, like we said before, qualitative data is not usually collected in number format. Well, how are qualitative and quantitative data alike? You need both in a lab. If it's going to be a high quality lab with reliable data, you should be collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. And both of those forms of data allow the scientist to notice patterns and trends with the data and then actually say, well, what do those patterns and trends mean? What caused those patterns and trends? And by looking at these questions, you are coming up ultimately with the answer to the problem or purpose of the lab. So scientists use both qualitative and quantitative data to formulate an answer to the original problem or purpose of the lab. So let's think about the crash lab. In the crash lab, we collected only quantitative data, the speed of the car and how far the block was pushed. So notice that we collected all number values. And a reminder, it's best to collect both. If you collect both qualitative and quantitative data in a lab, you're making your data more reliable and trustworthy. So in our Bouncing Balls lab, we are collecting both qualitative and quantitative data. So let's first look at the quantitative data, and by looking at the quantitative data, I'm showing you how to fill out the data tables for homework. All right, so everyone needs to complete the qualitative data table, but when it comes to the quantitative data tables, you're going to complete only one of the three. So if you used a stopwatch to keep track of how long you have to wait for the ball to stop bouncing on the surface, then you will fill out this data table as your second data table. So let's pretend that I dropped my ball on my kitchen table. In trial 1, the ball took 26 seconds to stop bouncing. In trial 2, the bounces lasted for 23 seconds and then 19 seconds in trial 3. So remember, the last column in the data table is asking for the average time it took for the ball to stop bouncing. We already know how to calculate averages. You add up all of the trials, and you take that sum or total and divide by how many trials you conducted. So it would be 26 plus 23 plus 19. The results of your 3 individual trials added together, which is 68, and then you would divide that by the number of trials you conducted. 68 divided by 3 is 22.67. Remember that we always round to the nearest 1/100th place value in science. So we would then take that value and we would enter it in the last column of our data table. Okay? So what if you did not use a stopwatch during the Bouncing Balls lab? Instead, you just counted the number of bounces. So let's pretend I dropped my ball on the science textbook. In trial 1, the ball did not bounce at all. Trial 2, 0 bounces, but trial 3, there was only 1 bounce. So what is the average number of bounces for the ball as it collides with the textbook? It would be 0 plus 0 plus 1 gives you 1. 1 divided by 3 is 0.333333. So we just round to the nearest 1/100th place value, so the average number of bounces is 0.33. So obviously that doesn't make sense when you're like, well, there's no such thing as a 0.33 bounce. But this again is an average. So what we can say is on average, we would expect a ball to basically not bounce on a textbook. You would either get no bounce at all, or maybe just one small little bounce. If you chose to record rebound height, this is the second data table that you would fill out. So let's pretend that I dropped my golf ball on a styrofoam pad. In trial 1, my ball rebounded to 23 centimeters. In trial 2, it rebounded to 67 centimeters, and then 69 rebound height for the third trial. So again, you would add up all of the results. Well, actually, let's back up for a second. Hopefully you realize you should redo this trial. This is an outlier because it's nowhere near the results of the other trials. So there was some kind of human error or maybe equipment error that happened during this trial, and you should redo this trial so that the number is more similar to the other 2 trials. Okay? But regardless, when you're done your 3 trials, you would add up the rebound heights for each trial to get the average rebound height. So again, it would be 23 plus 67 plus 69, which comes to a total of 159, divide by 3. So the average rebound height is 53 centimeters. And that's what you would put here. But we want to determine percent rebound. So for every person, it's different. You have to look at what your original release height was for your ball. If you used a meter stick, then your original release height was 100 centimeters. So this is what we discussed in class today. So if the average rebound height was 53 centimeters out of a possible 100 centimeters, you would divide the 2, which comes to 0.53 centimeters. You want to turn that into a percent, and that becomes 53%. So that is how you fill out the quantitative data table to the Bouncing Balls lab. So what about the very first data table that everyone must fill out, which is called the qualitative data table to the Bouncing Balls Lab? So the purpose of the qualitative data table is to prove that the ball's energy transformed in the Bouncing Balls Lab. So remember, just by looking at this diagram, you can prove that the ball's energy was transforming in this Bouncing Balls Lab. Because remember, the ball started at rest. That means that the ball expressed 100% GPE. You already know from our pendulum discussion and from our crash lab discussion, when the ball leaves its resting state and starts to fall, it's going to gain speed. It's also getting lower in height. So right there, the fact that your eyes can visually see the ball decreasing in height and the ball getting faster in speed, that is evidence of energy transformation. The ball's energy transformed from GPE to KE. Then the ball hits the surface and boing, bounces back up. So at that point, the ball's kinetic energy is transforming back into GPE because it's getting higher in height, and as it lifts up higher, it's going to slow down in speed. So the fact that you can actually see the ball fall and speed up and then rise and slow down, that is evidence, visual evidence, that the ball's energy is constantly transforming back and forth between GPE and KE. So let's look at some more examples of energy transformation that is happening in the lab. When the ball hits a surface, you notice that it might bounce a couple of times, and every bounce gets lower and lower. When you see that each consecutive bounce is getting lower and lower, that is sight evidence. You see with your eyes that the ball's energy is leaving the ball and going someplace else. The evidence that energy transfers out of the ball and goes to another location is proved by the fact that the ball's rebound gets lower and lower each time. So these are two examples that I just discussed that you can use in your qualitative data table to prove that the ball's energy both transferred and transformed. Let's look at some more examples of energy transfer and energy transformation in the Bouncing Balls Lab. So when the ball collides with a surface, so if I let the ball collide with a bucket of water, the water's going to splash. Well, the water was perfectly still until the ball made contact or collided with the water. So that is proof. When the water splashes, you see that splash. That is proof that some of the ball's moving kinetic energy transferred into the water and made the water move. If you dropped a ball on styrofoam and the styrofoam cracks, that is evidence, physical evidence that you see with your eyes to prove that some of the ball's energy transferred out of the ball and into the styrofoam when the ball collided with the styrofoam. When you see the pillow collapse and then spring back up, that movement of the pillow is physical evidence that you saw with your eyes that some of the ball's energy transferred into the pillow. For every trial, we asked you to put your hand on the surface, and you should have felt a vibration. That is physical evidence where you felt some of the ball's kinetic energy transfer into the surface. So that made the surface move or shake, and the vibration is evidence of that energy transfer. If you see the surface shift or move a bit, again, that's evidence that some of the ball's energy transferred out of the ball and into the surface. So how about some more examples of energy transformation? So we already talked about how the ball's energy transforms back and forth between GPE and KE, KE to GPE on every bounce. But when you hear the bubble wrap pop, when you hear a splash from the water, or you hear a bang when the ball collides with the surface, that is all evidence that some of the ball's kinetic energy transformed into a new form of energy, sound. Okay, So I hope that you found this video lesson helpful, and all of the notes that you see here in the lesson you can print out directly from Schoology. A reminder that your homework is to finish all 24 trials, and you need to complete the 2 data tables to the Bouncing Balls Lab, the qualitative data table and one of the quantitative data tables. Thank you.